Welcome to Faith Focals. My name is Faith. Always update your gaming drivers, even if they are gaming drivers, when you're planning on doing a live stream. We are starting a few minutes late because of that error. Before we get started into the stream proper, there's a couple things you ought to know about the stream. The main thing that you ought to know about this stream is that it's my goal to talk about truth. I would invite you, let's talk about truth. And so what I'm contributing is I am bringing what I believe to be the truth. I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible is true, so that's what I talk about. I think that's the most important source of truth that we have. So I'm open to talk about whether it's the most important source of truth. I'm open to discuss what you believe, but I am bringing what I believe to be true. However, that said, I am bringing it through the lens of my own perspective. So what I want you to know about this channel, trying to bring you the truth, trying to be truthful and honest. However, I am speaking from my perspective. My opinion could be wrong, the way that I interpret the truth. I do believe there is an objective truth that, of course, through my own lens, might get distorted through that lens. So doing the best I can with what I've got. The other thing that I would want you to know about this channel, I don't think it's going to be an issue today. I don't expect to host someone else's opinion today. Sometimes a review, respond to videos that I find on YouTube. If someone wants to chat, if you're in chat and you want to give your opinion, or if you want to respond to the comments after this stream is over, when it's a video on demand, when it's a VOD, then please do so. And if you're in chat, then my goal is to understand your point of view well enough that I could even argue for your point of view if necessary. If it probably isn't going to be necessary. If I believe one way and you believe the other and you're able to argue for your own point of view, that's great. But even if I don't believe what you believe, I want to know what you believe. So that means that I often give people with viewpoints that are not mine, my goal is to give them a lot of airtime so that I can come to an understanding. I don't just want to attack things that I don't understand or believe in. So first thing that I want you to know, I'm trying to present the truth, but it may be distorted by the lens of my opinion, so that's a challenge that we'll have to face. Another thing I want you to know is not all the opinions expressed on this channel may be mine. So I may not believe that all the things are true that get expressed on the channel. I do plan to allow those kinds of things to be spoken on the channel, either in chat or maybe a video that I'm responding to. I don't know if I would ever have guest input in the video on this channel. But my goal is to understand other people's beliefs also. So we're getting into the Bible segment of the stream. I have been looking forward to this for a while. This is Genesis 22, and we've been working through the Bible stream by stream. We've been going in a series through the book of Genesis, and lately have been following the life of Abraham. And God has definitely been testing Abraham's faith up to this point. I know it says that God tested Abraham in this verse, but even up to this point, when the story of Abraham begins, as far as we're concerned, as far as the reader is allowed to experience Abraham's life, that starts when Abraham is already 75 years old. So by our standards, that's a pretty old fella. By Abraham's standards, people in his day and age lived to be 200 years old, roughly, given a genealogy that I saw. I think it was Genesis chapter 11. Yeah. Let me double check. That's the thing, is it's been great going through the Bible like this, because I get to take a detailed look at what I believe and the order that things get expressed in, but I'm aware that as I keep going, things that were once familiar to me may fade, which is kind of sad, but a fact of life. So we have this genealogy of the descendants of Shem. Shem was the son of Noah. Noah was the one who had the ark that saved the human race, Noah and his family, escaped the worldwide flood. There is some debate about whether it was worldwide. I do believe it was worldwide based on what the Bible says. Shem was one of his 3 sons, and Abraham was a descendant of Shem. So we see these ages in the Bible getting smaller gradually. It's interesting, Peleg, it says that Peleg was alive when the earth was divided, I think. I believe that's in Genesis chapter 10 here. I thought it was, but maybe it was in the chapter that I just left. Don't see it in chapter 10. So let me just start us off with a deviation right away. Okay. It was in chapter 10. So to Eber were born 2 sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. So I just bring that up because I think it's interesting that we go from 430 years to 209 years during the life of Peleg. So maybe something catastrophic happened to the environment, the living conditions. Now people start to live 200 years. And Abraham's father, Terah, actually lived to be 119 years. So Terah had a very short life. Now we're in Genesis 21, and I'll go ahead and say that Abraham lived to be, no, we're in Genesis 22. No, trying to look up Hebrew words. I should clarify here. There we go. Off to a quick stop. So, Abraham did wind up living to 175 years. So he was somewhere between Terah and the running average, according to that genealogy. At this time that we're, tell you what, we'll get to exactly how old Abraham is in this chapter in a bit. But when Abraham was 75 years old, God said that he was going to make Abraham a great nation, that he was going to give Abraham offspring, that he was going to give the land of Canaan to Abraham's offspring. Everything as far as Abraham could see, to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west. And so God had given Abraham this promise, but it wasn't until 25 years later, when Abraham was 100 years old and Abraham's wife Sarah was 90. She was, well, we would understand her in our terms to be well past the age of childbearing, but even for their time, when people were living older, it was clear that she was past the age of childbearing, even to them in their day. And yet God allowed Sarah, when she was 90 years old, to bear their son Isaac, whose name means laughter. So, of course, kind of ridiculous that a baby would be born to a 90-year-old woman, but there you have it. And I think a big part of this laughter was Abraham and Sarah had so given up on her being part of God's plan that they had practiced what the surrounding peoples practiced. I don't think this was something Abraham wanted to do. I think he was actively resisting taking, I guess the word that we might use is a concubine. The Bible doesn't actually call Hagar Abraham's concubine. I've looked around and I couldn't see any reference to her being a concubine according to the Bible. So I don't know if that's if that was a conscious choice on God's part as he was inspiring the writers. I don't know if I've missed something, but it seems like God doesn't call her that, but she was Abraham's slave, who Abraham fathered a son by her. That son's name was Ishmael. And he and Sarah thought, okay, that's it, because Sarah had come up with the idea that must be how God's going to give you a son. And so Ishmael was born to Abraham through Hagar. So they had given up on Sarah being the mother. By the time Abraham had Ishmael, Abraham was already 86 years old. And by the way, from what I can tell from that genealogy that we looked at, let me see if I can jump back there. I'm seeing a lot of people living to be 35 years and fathering someone, 30 years fathering someone, 34, 30, 32. Everything's around the neighborhood of 30. Now, Terah was a little late. He lived 70 years and he had these three boys. So I don't know who came first when, but it says when Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered these three sons. And I can jump forward now. There we go. So it was understood, probably, on average, you get a child when you're 30. And yet Abraham waited until he was 86. That's 56 years beyond average before he even considered having a son by Hagar. Since Sarah couldn't give him a son, she was barren. So Abraham had been holding out, and then finally he and his wife gave up. God's not giving us a son by Sarah. He must mean Hagar. He must want us to get a son by Hagar. And then after Ishmael was born, God clarified and said, no, it will be Sarah. And by that time, Abraham and Sarah have given up, have so given up that they see this as a joke. Both of them laugh when they find out that God intends for Sarah, who is now in her old age, when he intends for her to bear a son for Abraham. And then in Genesis chapter 21, so that was the previous chapter here, the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised, and Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. Means he laughs. So, laughter. God told Abraham that's what he should call the baby, Isaac. God said, you will call him Isaac. I think it was kind of a little dig, a little lighthearted dig at, you guys didn't believe me. Now, of course, Abraham did. I believe Abraham was trusting in God as far as he could understand. So in Genesis 15, that was before Abraham had his first son, Ishmael. It tells us, and he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. But he still couldn't figure out what it was that God was promising him. He said, "Oh Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess this land that you've said you're going to give to my offsprings? I don't have any offspring. I'm expecting to give my house to my servant, Eliezer." Not house, but like household, all of his possessions. He's going to be my heir. And God's saying, no, you're going to have a son from your own body. This son is basically, at that time, that was the closest you could come to saying this son will have your genetic line, before Gregor Mendel discovered genetic science. But God answers him, you're going to have your own son. But Abraham still had a lot to figure out. Abraham believed the Lord. It was counted to him as righteousness, but he still wasn't able to put it all together. And that's where we get Hagar and Ishmael. And I think for our passage here, it's important that I point out, as far as I can tell, I believe Abraham loved Ishmael deeply. In fact, let me go back to, we have Genesis 15, God says, no, you will have a son. Genesis 16, Abraham has Ishmael through Hagar. And then in 17, God talks to Abraham again later when Ishmael is 13 years old and says, your wife is going to give you a son. Let me see. As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. Abraham fell on his face and laughed, see, I told you, and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Because Ishmael had been, up to this point, Abraham's last hope. This is the son. This must be the son that God has been promising us. Abraham has been living for 13 years with Ishmael as his son, thinking, this is the son God has promised, and raising Ishmael up to serve the Lord, I betcha, because in the next chapter over, it says that God is speaking about Abraham. Let's see. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. So apparently Abraham is the type of person who would lead his household to serve the Lord, which since Ishmael is 13 by this time, then I think that implies he'd already been doing that process with his son. And seems to me that Abraham had this heart for his son Ishmael, but we found out in Genesis chapter 21. Let me go ahead and skip a couple chapters over here. Isaac finally was born, and Sarah took issue with Ishmael and Hagar, because of course Ishmael may be Abraham's son, but Ishmael is not Sarah's son. So Sarah sees Ishmael, the son of Hagar the Egyptian, laughing, kind of mocking, possibly laughing in mockery. Some versions, I think, outright say mocking. And the idea is that this boy would be mocking her son, Isaac, the son of the promise, the real son of the promise, that he might be mocking her, because Hagar, when she saw that she had had a son and God hadn't allowed Sarah to have a son yet, she was haughty. She held herself in higher esteem than she held her mistress, Sarah. And so that was a point of contention on Sarah's part. So Sarah had told Abraham, that woman and her son will not be an heir with my son. Cast her out. And Abraham was not happy with that. This thing was very displeasing. But God said, be not displeased. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. And then, and God was with the boy, Ishmael, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt, which happened to be where she came from. So that makes sense that she would want to have a wife for him from her own people. And now we come to this chapter. And after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here I am. Now, I got to make a confession here. I've already taken this long to get to this point, but I've got to make a confession here. Because earlier in the stream, weeks and weeks ago, when I was talking about how Abraham had fathered a son through Hagar, had thought that Ishmael was the son of the promise, I mentioned that it's 13 years between the time that God speaks to him in Genesis 15 and the next time that God speaks to him in Genesis 17. Why is it that God is silent for so long? God has spoken to Abraham at different points, less than 10 years at a shot, because Abraham starts out, he's 75, and then he goes on to be 86 years old by the time he fathers Ishmael. Let me take care of something real quick here. There we go. And so there's this, God has spoken to Abraham about 4 times within that 10-year span initially, 10 or 11, and then silence for 13 years. And I made a big deal about this. I said, why was God silent? Is that the way it's supposed to work? And maybe it was because Abraham had done the wrong thing, or I just kind of made a big point of that silence. Now, God wasn't outright calling Abraham out, wasn't outright dealing with Abraham immediately about this mistake. Abraham thought he had done the right thing according to God's plan for 13 years. And I kind of harped on this for a couple streams in a row. Well, as I'm looking at this passage, the last time we hear about God talking to or being involved in Abraham's life, let's see, was there anything in chapter 20? Not directly. The year before, God has a visit with Abraham. That was when God judged the city of Sodom. And so God, before judging the city of Sodom, he has this visit with Abraham, and he says, in a year I'll come back and Sarah will have a son. And so that is the last time that we see God directly speaking to Abraham. Within that year, Sodom is judged. Abraham starts this kind of relationship with the king of the region that he's wandering around in, King Abimelech. They have a run-in. Abraham has this tendency to try to save his life from someone who might kill him in order to get to his lovely wife Sarah by saying she's my sister, which she was his half-sister. So that meant that the king thought that she was available, but she wasn't. God deals with King Abimelech, talks to Abimelech directly, but we don't see God speak to Abraham directly. And then in the next chapter, it says, the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. So Abraham has this great blessing, the son Isaac. God said, I will visit Sarah, and she will have a son. So absolutely exactly what God had promised. So then we have, let's see. Sorry, my brain is multitasking. It should not be doing that. So we have this visit from God, not a direct visit, but probably at least just as good, because they have their son. This is the son of the promise. This is exactly what God has been working with Abraham for his whole life, has been promising Abraham his whole life. This is the culmination of everything. So, and then we see the child grew and was weaned. So I don't have a lot of experience with young kids. I understand it takes a couple years to get to this point. So now Abraham had Isaac, his son, when Abraham was 100 years old. When Isaac was weaned, Abraham would have been 102, maybe 105, depending on how it worked out. And had to send Hagar away. And then this verse says, at that time, Abimelech and Phicol came and visited. We covered that last week. There's another version that says, and it came to pass at that time. There's some about this time. I know that I saw something that was looking at a version where there's an implication. This says about oh no, I remember what it was. Okay, we're going to go down to the bottom here. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. So many days. Is this like a week? Yeah, what is many days? For a long time. So I'm not sure exactly how the Hebrew lays out. I'm not going to linger long enough to go with the Hebrew. We've got a vague sum of time that the translators in some versions take to be a long time. Now we're here. After these things. So we had what could be a long time. And this is after a long time that Abraham, if that's right, if the many days means a long time, this is even after that. So there's an implication that an indistinct but possibly lengthy amount of time has passed. So I'm making a confession. I don't think I have to yet, because we don't have any proof that this is longer than 13 years, which is what I was saying it took between the times that God spoke to Abraham around the birth of Ishmael. But let's see how long it's been between the one time that God spoke to Abraham a year before Isaac's birth, or maybe we want to start the clock at Isaac's birth. That was the last time God visited Abraham and Sarah. And this time when God speaks to Abraham. So we'll be looking for clues about that. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Let me stop here real quick. Take your son, your only son Isaac. Well, we know that's not true, right? Abraham had another son, Ishmael. So did God forget about Ishmael? Why is God saying your only son Isaac? In Genesis 21, we did see that Ishmael nearly died. Hagar was sent away. Let's see. He rose in the morning, took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and sent her away with the child. So she's wandering around. This water in the skin runs out. and she's afraid that she and her son are going to die of thirst out there, and God points her to a spring so that she and the child Ishmael can continue, and then we know that Ishmael grew up and was fine. So Ishmael's still alive, but I think what God is saying here, your only son Isaac, and let's just take a look at this word only, by the way. Yahid. By the way, I'm using the website blb.org for Blue Letter Bible, blb.org or blueletterbible.org. Of the free Bible sites on the internet, this is my favorite because it does allow us to look at the Hebrew. It does allow us to look at other Bible verses, Bible versions, I should say. So this word, Yahid, only, solitary. In fact, in one place it's desolate. So let's have a look at that verse. And this is a psalmist. I don't know if this is David or someone else who contributed to the book of Psalms, praying, "Turn thee unto me and have mercy upon me, for I am desolate and afflicted." For I am only and afflicted, basically, is the idea. So definitely, okay, single, solitary, only. I don't know what TWOT means, only begotten son. So take your son, your only son Isaac. That's definitely how it's meant to be understood from it, what I can tell. I think what God is saying when he's drawing attention to Isaac as Abraham's only son, even though we know that Ishmael was alive, God is saying, you've already made a sacrifice to me, Abraham. You've already sacrificed your son to me. Not your son Isaac. You sacrificed your son Ishmael to me. And I did not give him back. So that Abraham already has this probably a heart wound from having to let his son Ishmael go. This thing was very displeasing to Abraham. In fact, the word displeasing here, I've already mentioned in a previous stream, is a word I think that gets used for the idea of wrong, the idea of not according to a right standard, not according to a straight standard, kind of crooked. Let me go ahead and quickly validate that. This matter, ra'ah is our word here. Interesting that another word, ra'ah, is going to be important in our passage, but I think it's going to be a different word. It doesn't mean this. It's kind of like how in English sometimes we have two words that sound the same, homophones, but they mean different things. So ra'ah, this meaning to be bad, be evil, and to do evil or wickedly. So when this thing was displeasing to Abraham, he's thinking, this is wrong. This shouldn't be. But God said to Abraham, do not be displeased. Do not think it shouldn't be. This is the plan. I'm going to fulfill my promise through Isaac. And for your sake, I will also bless Ishmael. But as far as Abraham is concerned, after this, Ishmael is gone. Ishmael no longer exists as far as Abraham is concerned. So Abraham has already made a sacrifice, and God, there's been no reward for the sacrifice that Abraham made when he let go of Ishmael at God's command. Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So there's another story in the Bible that comes later about a guy named Jephthah. And in the story of Jephthah, Jephthah prays to God. He's going to go to battle. And he says, God, let me get victory over my enemies. And if you do, then I will give you the first thing that comes out of my house as a burnt offering. And in this story, God allows Jephthah to succeed at this battle. So naturally, Jephthah now has to fulfill this oath that he's made to God. He goes home And the first thing to come out of his house is his daughter, and she's celebrating. And there's, you might wonder, okay, so what else could Jephthah have possibly have been thinking would come out of his house? Maybe his pet dog? Well, Jephthah was an Israelite, so they didn't keep dogs. Dogs were considered unclean. Pet cat. Well, actually, the law of Israel, as far as I can tell, doesn't say that dogs are unclean. There are certain clean animals which the people of Israel can eat, I guess keep. So, dogs are not a part of that class of animals. So, I would assume if a dog is unclean, a cat would be unclean, but that's just my assumption. I don't have any validation for that, but I've never heard of cats being a common pet among the people of Israel. So, who else? I mean, what else would have come out of his house? Doesn't that just leave people? From what I understand, in ancient times, the way that homes were structured, the people would keep animals like goats and things within the walls of their house. I'm not sure how architecturally, how you deal with the smells and things like that, but apparently there might have been a place for clean animals that would be proper for a sacrifice to be in the house. Maybe Jephthah was thinking he'd encounter one of them, but no, it happened to be his daughter. Heartbreakingly, she was celebrating his victory. And so Jephthah mourned because he had made this oath. He had to fulfill it. He had to give his daughter as an offering to God. And there are some Bible teachers who think, well, she was an offering, but she didn't necessarily have to be a burnt sacrifice. So so maybe it says that he told her about his oath, and she said, do what you've promised the Lord, but let me go away for 2 months with my friends and bemoan the fact that I will not be that I will always be a virgin. I will never marry. And so she goes away for 2 months, and then she comes back home, and Jephthah makes her an offering to the Lord. So the question is this a figurative offering, or is this a physical offering? So the word, I bring this up because the word here for burnt offering, let's have a look at that. This is talking about Isaac here. Offer him there as a burnt offering. Olah. For some reason it's brought up twice here. But we're looking for the word Olah. So I have the story of Jephthah on a different tab. Here we go. Here's the verse where it talks, she was his only child, by the way. So that word for only is Yahid. She was his one, Yahid, and only, Rock, maybe a synonym, Yahid again. So definitely this idea of onlyness. But let's see. Who did it? Okay, so the reference to her being a burnt offering is up here when he makes the prayer. That whatever comes from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. What's that word? Olah. Again, twice. Olah. So same word, same idea here between Jephthah, and now we're back in the passage about Abraham. God telling Abraham to offer his son as a burnt offering. So same word here. So I don't know necessarily that what we see in this story carries over, but it well could. So let's see how Abraham responds. Is Abraham going to make Isaac some kind of offering? This word Olah, by the way. Let me, there we go. Either a whole burnt offering or the idea of an ascent, which is, I think, is why some speakers think that maybe for Jephthah, it was kind of like he's lifting her up to God. It's a kind of offering, but it doesn't have to be a literal offering. It's an offering upward to God, perhaps. And okay, I can go use the back button here. So we'll see how Abraham understands God's command here. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. So I think here we have our first clue about how old Isaac might have been at this time. We know Isaac was at least past the age of being weaned, because that was mentioned in Genesis 21. And here we see that Abraham, who by the way is at least 100 years old, rose, cut wood, saddled a donkey. So I imagine the donkey gets to carry the wood. Has a couple young men with him. And they travel for 3 days. So there's more than one person. I imagine more people than that donkey could carry, even if it wasn't carrying the wood. So there's going to be a lot of foot traffic going on. And I know as a kid, even just riding in my parents' car, of course I had to ride with my brother, so I don't know how I would have done if I wasn't sharing the car with my brother. But even just a portion of a day riding in the car was kind of intolerable for me as a kid. So this is 3 days of traveling, walking. If anyone's riding, it's riding on a donkey, which isn't as smooth as a ride in the car. So I think in order to have a 3-day trip, Isaac has to be at least of the maturity level where he's going to be able to tolerate a considerable level of discomfort. Probably make himself useful on the trip. They're going to have to stay overnight in the outdoors. So Isaac, I would think, is probably old enough at least to be useful. So maybe at least the preteens by this age. So now that's putting Abraham's age, since Isaac was born when Abraham was 100, we might assume that Abraham was 110 or something along those lines. Isaac would have been the size of a 10-year-old. By the way, let's think about the wood for the sacrifice. Because God is telling Abraham, make an olah, which is translated here, burnt offering. And Abraham actually cuts wood. So it looks to me like Abraham is and of course, if you're familiar with the story, this is a no-brainer. But it looks to me like Abraham is actually interpreting this as a burnt sacrifice. So he's got to have enough wood for at least a 10-year-old human. And a human is made of 60% water. I looked it up before the stream. So there's got to be enough wood there to burn off enough fluid in order to make this a burnt offering. So getting into some detail, maybe a little gross, especially since we've never seen God command a human sacrifice. This is the only time that God commands anything like a human sacrifice in the Bible. We do have that story of Jephthah. There's questions about it, but I don't believe that Jephthah's prayer was a God-honoring one, especially since anything could have come out of Jephthah's house. Who knows if it was one of the things that God would have approved of being a sacrifice. Definitely his daughter. I don't think God approved of her being a sacrifice in the sense of a burnt offering. So that's where there's the question, could it have been some other kind of offering? Here we're seeing Abraham acting like this is a burnt offering with the wood. So there's got to be a considerable amount of wood. If Isaac is at least of the age to manage himself for a 3-day trip, there's got to be a considerable amount of wood here, which is going to be relevant in a bit. So on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to the young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." So I ran over this footnote. Let's see if it's a spoiler. Okay, young man. So why does this footnote say young man here? Let's go into our tools. Abraham said to the young men, Na'ar, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the lad, Na'ar, will go over there and we will worship and return to you." That's interesting. So the lad, Na'ar, is being described the same as young men. So basically, Abraham said, are these lads? Said to the lads, stay here with the donkey, I and the lad will go with you? Or is he saying to the young men, stay here with the donkey, I and the young man will go with you? So let's have a look at this word. Boy, lad, servant, youth, retainer. That's kind of what we're getting, since the young men are also called Na'ars. So in Genesis 14, Abraham is talking with the king of Sodom. Abraham has just gone to battle against 4 kings that came in from distant lands to attack the 5 cities that Abraham was living nearby. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me. So he's talking to the king. The king of Sodom is saying, take your spoils. You've earned them, basically. And Abraham says, no, I don't want you to have a claim in my wealth. I don't want you to be able to say that you made Abraham wealthy. I'm just going to take what the young men have eaten. And I think the implication here is the young men who went to battle with me. So you wouldn't just have children going to battle, ideally. In fact, let's go a little deeper here, because I know something about these young men. When Abram heard that his kinsman, that's his nephew Lot, who happened to be living in Sodom when the kings came and conquered that area and took their prisoners, when Abraham heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. So these are not just any males in Abraham's tent city, his household. These would have been trained for battle. Let's see what this word men here is, by the way. Because it's not Na'ar, or else it would have shown up in our search. Hanik. Trained, instructed, trained servant, tried, experienced. So these are knowledgeable men, probably would have been elevated because in his household because of their experience. That's the idea I'm getting. So not just any of his servants. These are the ones who have earned a reputation as being experienced, trained, capable. Okay, so we're back to let's see. So this is back to the young men. Abraham ran to the herd. This is when God visited Abraham, this verse here. Ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. So someone who knows how to dress a living animal and turn it into a meal. Before they lay down, that's Abraham's nephew Lot. He had taken in the 2 angels that came to see what the city of Sodom was like. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. So I believe that word young is Na'ar. So this doesn't seem like a case for children here, given what we know about Sodom. So far in context, I'm seeing that the idea of young man is someone who seems capable of doing grown-up things. That's my impression here. Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. So they've made a three-day journey, Abraham and these young men. And he is trusting these young men with the donkey. So these are mature enough that they can be left on their own with the donkey. And Abraham, let's see. God told Abraham to go up, offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Let's see, that's further down than I want to be. So on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. So they haven't even gotten to the mountain yet, from what I can tell. Abraham can see it from a distance. Or maybe he's seeing the place where God wants him to have the sacrifice, but it's still quite some distance from there. And Abraham is entrusting these young men to take care of their donkey, which is the means that they need in order to get back. These are the young men that he has selected for this purpose. So it seems to me that since Isaac is described the same as these young men, we might assume he has a similar level of maturity to these young men. So maybe he's not just 10 years old, maybe he'd be closer to 20 years old by this point to be a Na'ar, the way that it's described here. And that would make Abraham, by the way, 120 years old by this point. Now, we know that Isaac can't be more than 37 years old, because in the next chapter, it says Sarah lived 127 years. She's 10 years younger than Abraham, and when she had Isaac, she was 90 years. So we add 10 from that 90 to bring it up to 100, and then we add 27. So Isaac can be no more than 37 years old. And I was just reading right before the stream that in Jewish tradition, Isaac would have been 37 years old at this point. And then the reason that Sarah's death is described in the next chapter is because she found out that her son was going to be sacrificed, and that's what killed her. So that's, from what I understand, I looked this up on Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt. But from what I understand, that's the Jewish tradition concerning what Isaac's age could have been. So Abraham could be 120, possibly 137 by this point. So Abraham and by the way, if Abraham is that far up in age, Isaac may have been responsible for more than just keeping himself entertained or something during the trip. He may have actively had to be taking care of his aging father as they're taking this 3-day journey, climbing up a mountain. We know that Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering after he left the donkey with the men, and laid it on Isaac, his son. So Isaac is now capable of carrying, we know that he's capable of carrying all of this wood, which has to be enough wood to burn someone of the size that he would be as a whole burnt offering. Assuming that's how Abraham's taking it, but why would you need wood for an offering if you're not intending on burning it? Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father, Abraham, my father. And he said, Here I am, my son. He said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? So it makes sense if Isaac was a younger boy, a child, maybe he wouldn't have been so aware of the pattern of things, of what you need in order for a burnt offering. Dad's got it under control. There may be less questioning. Of course, I could be wrong. Kids are pretty inquisitive. Definitely, it's not surprising at all if he's, say, 20 or 30. He would know. And apparently Abraham has been making burnt offerings such that Isaac is familiar with the process. The Bible doesn't, well, I think in the previous chapter it did say that Abraham made a burnt offering. We don't know how old Isaac would have been as of the previous chapter. But Isaac has seen this enough that he knows, hey, wait a minute, there's supposed to be an offering to burn here. Where's the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them together. So here's the question. Abraham says God will provide for himself the lamb. He's kind of leaving it out there for the future. It's a future possibility. God could change how this is going to go. It's possible God has already provided for himself a burnt offering. Abraham, your son is the offering. Abraham, I think, is kind of holding on to the idea that maybe it's not necessary that Isaac has to be the burnt offering. Let me go ahead and jump to Hebrews 11. Us Christians affectionately call this passage the Hall of Faith. Abraham gets listed among a whole bunch of other people who demonstrate faith in God. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. This is a accumulation of Abraham's whole life. He has waited 100 years to have this son. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Spoiler. But that's the kind of thought process Abraham probably had to be wrestling with God. You told me that I was going to have a son, and yeah, I do. I've enjoyed this son for as long as you've given him to me, and it's such a shock. It brings us to laughter that we've got this son, the fulfillment of your promise of 100 years, and you say that he's going to be the father of nations. You say that his offspring are going to claim this land as their own in my name, and yet I'm going to kill him. So how is this promise going to work? And interestingly, and I believe that the author of Hebrews here is kind of informed by God as he's writing about what Abraham was thinking. I don't think this is guesswork. I think he is divinely aware of what Abraham was thinking. And Abraham is not thinking God is evil. God is cruel for demanding this from me. God is going to take another son from me and not give him back. Abraham is thinking, God has given me a promise, and Isaac is the fulfillment of the promise, and I see him in front of me, which means that the promise is going to be fulfilled, even out to his offspring claiming this land, even out to his offspring being nations who come from me, from my line. So if God is asking me to kill Isaac, that promise is still going to be fulfilled through Isaac. The only possibility is that I get Isaac back. That's the only possibility. Now, I think Abraham still had a lot of wrestling to do, just like in chapter 15. He believed God, but he still had to figure out how this would work. So they went, both of them together, and Isaac said, "Where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them together. And they came to the place of which God had told him. Abraham built the altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. So this is probably more astonishing than it looks, because it would be one thing if Abraham is binding a child. 100-year-old man, well, we imagine that he probably would have had trouble corralling a child for this purpose, definitely. But then again, if you're to live 200 years old, let's assume that Abraham has aged to the point that we would understand 50 to be. You still have some strength when you're 50. That he'd be at the middle of his lifespan if he was around the area of 100. But now let's consider if Isaac is 20 years old and Abraham's 120, maybe 130. He's considerably older, and Isaac is stronger. Isaac could probably have overcome Abraham in a fight for his life. So it says that Abraham bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar. So I don't get a sense that Isaac is struggling. I think Isaac is realizing that whatever his father is doing, it's God's will that it be done. Whatever this, it doesn't seem like something that's in God's character, but that is the faith of these two men, Abraham and the son that he has raised to serve the Lord, and to know what's necessary for a burnt offering. It doesn't seem like Abraham had to spell this out for Isaac. This is what I'm doing. I think Isaac was seeing the meaning of it as Abraham's expecting him to cooperate, and Isaac also was willing to make that sacrifice, to be that sacrifice. Also, I think it's interesting. Well, we'll go a little further. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. So I was just wondering in my head, how come Abraham didn't slaughter his son before laying him on the altar? I mean, Abraham is laying Isaac on top of this bundle of wood, which can't be comfortable for Isaac, for one thing. And of course, it makes sense if Isaac is a grown man, or even a teenager, but that Abraham may not have been able to get him up on the altar. So even the process of laying Isaac on the altar may have required Isaac to actually help, to be cooperative enough to put himself on there, in order to fulfill this request for the sacrifice. So it speaks well of both of them. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So clearly, by this point, we know for sure that Abraham was intending Isaac as a burnt offering. That may give some color, some interpretation to the other passage about Jephthah. But Abraham was willing, and God fortunately stopped him in the act. And based on the author of Hebrews, it seems like Abraham wasn't just going through the motions. Okay, God, stop me because this is the last moment. No, Abraham apparently would have made the downstroke, apparently would have completed it, thinking that God has to raise him from the dead, according to the inspired author of Hebrews' interpretation of this passage. So, offered the ram up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." Now I study the King James Version, the KJV, when I'm preparing for the stream, and then I get to the ESV because I think that that may be easier for listeners to grasp. In modern day English, King James Version can sometimes be a little bit different, a little bit hard to understand. And then I get into the ESV, and sometimes things take me by surprise. Today I read a little bit ahead, so I wasn't as surprised. But it's interesting. It says the Lord will provide. On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Let's have a look at the King James Version. Jehovah Jireh. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. So that seems different than it shall be provided. That seems like kind of like a confidence. Oh, God will give us what we want, maybe. But there's apparently an alternate translation here. We've got a footnote, "will see." So the Lord will see. Or he will be seen. So in here in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. So this word Jehovah Jireh, that's one of the names that we acknowledge as Christians. One of the many names that God has been called by in the Bible that means something to the people who called God this. Abraham is choosing that name for this place. And apparently Jireh is a variation of the form Ra'ah. So Ra'ah, this is different than the one for wickedness. This Ra'ah means to see. And the King James Version, the way that this tense reads, "In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen." So I'm just calling attention to this because of what God said earlier. "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." So sometimes I wonder about these words that have multiple meanings. I wonder if there is some wordplay intended that, unfortunately, as English speakers, we don't tend to pick up. I do wish I knew Hebrew and Greek well enough that I could see the Bible written in Hebrew and get more depth from the original language than I can as an English person looking word by word and trying to catch little crumbs here and there. So on the one hand, definitely it means something to Abraham that God did provide a lamb. God did provide an alternative sacrifice to Isaac. And then, but maybe it also means something to Abraham that the Lord saw. This whole event was so that the Lord would see that I feared God. Which, interestingly, I mentioned that Abraham had been in this lie with his wife Sarah, where he's calling her his sister, which gets him into trouble a couple times. And his concern was the people of the land do not fear God, so they would kill me in order to have my wife for themselves. So now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gates of his enemies." Let's check, or the gates of their enemies, okay. "And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." So I think this section is interesting that, I mean, this is everything that God has promised Abraham. Well, these verses here are everything that God has promised Abraham up to this point in Genesis chapter 12, I think in 13, in 15, and 17. At various points, God has been saying, I'm going to give you these, I'm going to give you these. And now God again says to Abraham, because you've done this, I'm going to give you these. And then my little antenna kind of lifts up and I go, wait a minute. God already promised this, right? So how come, I mean, did Abraham have to earn all of the promises? Because God promised Abraham this from the beginning. How come God is now saying, because of this, you're going to receive these promises? Was this a kind of works-based thing? Which for me as a Protestant Christian, that is a kind of an unfamiliar concept from where I come from. I tend to look at God's dealing with us through Jesus. Us humans are, each one of us sins against God, and we don't realize the gravity of the sins that we consider small that we commit that are opposed to God's will. They are enough to condemn us eternally to punishment. The Bible calls that final punishment the lake of fire, to reflect the kind of punishment that it is. And so the thing is that none of us can earn our own way out of that, can pay God back for all the wrongs we've done, because we carry that guilt on us. It takes someone who doesn't have that guilt in order to pay for our guilt. And every human being who has ever existed, except for one, has sinned against God. And that one is God the Son, who took on humanity, was born as a human, even though he had pre-existed as God, as the second person of the Divine Trinity. And God the Son, Jesus, lived a human life without sin for 33 years, and he died as a criminal, taking on our sin as his, and rose again from the dead, which means that God approved of that punishment for our sake. So there's nothing we could have done to earn that. We now have the benefit if we can kind of take on Jesus's righteousness as our own. Jesus gives us his righteousness, and that's what we stand in before God when it's time for God to judge us for our sin. We stand before God in the righteousness of Jesus, and because of Jesus' punishment, which God has approved, we're allowed to enter heaven just as if we'd never sinned, and have that eternal life with God instead of in punishment. And that's not our doing. That's not something we earn. So it's interesting to me that God is saying, because of this, Now I'm going to give you all of the promises. There's a passage in James 2, that has something to say about this. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? So James is looking at this passage and kind of coming to the same, drawing the same connections that I am, and that there's some connection here between what Abraham is doing and his justification, which let's go back a couple chapters. Genesis 15, we've already been here before. It says, Abraham believed the Lord, and he, the Lord, counted it to him, Abraham, as righteousness. So, and this gets mentioned in the book of Romans. I think I can get there. Romans 4, if I'm not mistaken. I did not prepare this section as well, but this is interesting. What then shall we say was gained by Abraham our forefather according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Now the one who works, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as his due. And to the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness. So we'll skip down a little bit. I think the idea, basically, we're seeing that Paul, who wrote Romans, is saying if Abraham earned his salvation through works, then he could kind of boast he was good enough. Even though before God, he couldn't boast that he was good enough because he had that innate sin, just like every human does. We know that Abraham sinned based on what the Bible tells us about him. But the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness. So it's a gift. It's not anything that person can boast in. So we'll jump down here. For we say that faith was counted to Abraham as righteousness. How then was it counted to him? Was it before or after he had been circumcised? I made that blunder a few weeks ago too. But at the time that God was talking to Abraham, Abraham believes the Lord and the Lord counts it to him as righteousness. And then God has this covenant that God makes with Abraham. It's a one-sided covenant. And then a couple chapters over, God establishes a two-sided covenant where Abraham and his offspring, his male offspring naturally, are going to be circumcised as they're part of the covenant, that agreement between them. So in chapter 15, Abraham believes God is counted to him as righteousness. In chapter 17 is when this circumcision is established. So I'm in the wrong chapter. Here, I want this tab. There we go. So it was not after, but before he was circumcised. So Abraham didn't do any work to earn this righteousness before God. He's earning this righteousness by faith. Let me see if I can jump ahead a bit. Okay, it doesn't look like it does. I'm going to keep reading from where we are. For the promise to Abraham and his offspring that he would be the heir of the world did not come through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. So it's not something that Abraham did. It's not because he obeyed God's commands. It's because he believed in God, because he was relying on God. For the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. Okay, so hold on. Let me start from the proper point. For if it is the adherents of the law who are to be the heirs, faith is null and the promise is void. Abraham couldn't have the righteousness because he believed God. The law brings wrath, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. That is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring, not only to the adherent of the law, but also to the one who shares the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. So let me summarize this. We're going to stop here. If Abraham had done something to earn God's favor, this passage is saying, then he could boast before God, but God's favor wouldn't extend to anybody else. Because Abraham did not do anything to earn God's favor, because he believed in God, and that's what was credited to him as righteousness. That is a gift from God. And so it's not up to Abraham to have God's favor. That favor can go both to Abraham as a gift from God, and it can also be given to Abraham's descendants. And the way that Paul talks in this book, Romans, he's saying that everyone who has that faith, everyone who shares the faith of Abraham, whether they're Jewish or not, can benefit from that gift, that righteousness. So, like Abraham, we, even though I'm not Jewish, we can believe God and have that righteousness credited to us through Jesus. But in James is saying, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that said, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. So that's kind of weird. We've got two passages in the Bible that seem to say different things. Maybe someone would look at these two passages and say, see, there's a contradiction in the Bible. If your Bible was inerrant, you wouldn't have this contradiction, would you? And from what I understand, when Martin Luther, who was one of the Protestant reformers, the beginning of the Protestant branch of Christianity, was looking at the Bible, was trying to come to his understanding of the Bible, he, of course, saw Romans and was saying it can't be by works. According to what Paul is saying, it can't be right by works. And then he came to James, and I understand he called it a right strawly epistle, the way that he spoke back during his age. And the problem was that James makes this statement that a person is justified by works. So this was a real struggle for Martin Luther. So how do I reconcile these as a Christian? My understanding as I'm reading this passage, of course, you're going to have to count on how God through the Holy Spirit expresses it to you. But what I understand as I read this passage, I believe Paul is telling the truth in what he's saying, and I believe James is telling the truth in what he's saying. But when he says that Abraham was justified by works, he's not saying that the works gave Abraham the righteousness, because he's saying the scripture was fulfilled that says Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. So he's looking at the same scripture in Genesis 15. Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. So James believes the same thing. Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. But how do we know that actually worked? How do we know that Abraham actually had that righteousness? Earlier on in this passage, he says, but someone will say, you have faith. I have, well, tell you what, let me go further. Let me give us full context here. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So you have someone who expresses a desire, expresses a mental state, I would have you be better. But if that person has the power to help that person in their need and doesn't apply that power, then what do you believe? Do you believe the words that are coming out of their mouth, oh, I want you to be well? Or do you believe their actions, which, because they're withholding the means for the person who needs it to be well, that seems to imply they don't want that person to be well. So even though they may be saying things, it's their actions that are telling the truth about them. So also, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. So you're going to see the evidence of that faith in the way that person behaves. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. So let me just say that in Greek, which is the original language for this book of James, the way that it was originally written. They didn't have spaces between words. They didn't have punctuation. So I kind of wonder about where these quotation marks originally start and finish. But I think the idea is, if someone is telling you something, you don't necessarily believe that person unless they are taking the actions necessary to evidence what they're saying. Words are cheap is the way that we would express it in modern parlance. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. So even the demons, the angels from heaven who fell, know God well enough to know the truth about him. But their actions are different, right? They're fighting against God, and they've earned God's enmity, and they know that one day they're going to get defeated. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? Which is what we see in Genesis 22, which I'm going to have to type to get back to. Let's see. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and surely multiply all the blessings that we've seen before. So it was because Abraham had not withheld his son, because Abraham had gone through and taken the actions. But the reason that Abraham took the actions was that he was originally relying in faith on God. Without the faith, he wouldn't have taken the actions. So the faith comes first, and that is what his righteousness is based on, is his belief and his trust and his reliance on God. And as a natural byproduct, after Abraham receives that righteousness from God, he acts out that righteousness. You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Now, not by works alone, by the way, because people can act like they're one way, but not actually believe that in their heart too. People can act in a deceitful way, just like people can speak in a deceitful way. People can act in a deceitful way. So it takes both. We understand Abraham had faith, and that naturally expressed itself in works. So that's why, as Christians, when we're looking at someone else and another person, trying to understand, does this person have a relationship with God through Jesus? Is this person saved, as we put it, from eternal punishment? Does this person need to know about the good news about Jesus? One of the things we look to is how that person behaves. And you have some people who say that they are Christians, who claim Christianity, but don't act righteously. And they say, but it doesn't matter because Jesus has saved me anyway, so I'm free to act however I want. And based on Genesis 22 here, based on James, we understand that as a person truly believes in God and receives that status of righteousness from Jesus, Jesus' righteousness is applied to us so that it is as if we had not sinned. That person will go on then to act more righteous, to take righteous actions as a natural byproduct of that. And so that's what we're looking for in a person's actions. Now, it could be sometimes someone is a new Christian. They haven't grown in Christ, as we would put it. And so they may still be trying to figure out, what parts of my old life should I let go? What parts of my old life are safe to keep? What parts of my new life should replace the parts of my old life? What does this look like? And they may make mistakes. They may do things that for a Christian, that is totally not Christian. They must not really be saved. That is not necessarily the case. What they do is not necessarily an indication of their righteousness under Jesus. However, as they continue to live in their faith as a Christian, their belief and their reliance on God through Jesus, we would expect them to become more righteous, to follow God better. I wanted to point out this angel of the Lord. I mentioned before, people believe that the angel of the Lord, Christians believe the angel of the Lord could be Jesus, the second person of the Godhead, appearing to people before he was born. So before he took on humanity, before he had a human body. However, the way that he talks, and it's a little different in this version. Let's have a look at the King James Version for this passage. It's more than one verse, so I have to fully change versions here. Okay, so maybe... Hold on. Let me see if the English Standard Version will actually do it for me. So, I think let's look at the first... Yeah. The angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Now, who was Abraham offering Isaac to? So up here, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham, take your son and offer him as a burnt offering." And then Abraham told the young men, okay, I and the boy will go over there and worship. So he's not saying who, but the understanding would be that he's offering Isaac to God himself. So this angel, by saying, "You have not withheld," it's up here. "You have not withheld your son, your only son, from me," then is kind of taking on godhood. That's not something an angel should do. There are other points in the Bible where a human is interacting with an angel and tries to bow to that angel, because we just get so odd in the presence of angels that we think they deserve extra honor, more worship than, say, we would be due. And the angels always have to correct the human and say, no, I'm a servant just like you. Worship God. So we get confused sometimes when we see angels, and we should know better. But there are a couple cases in the Bible where the angel gives a correction, but this angel does not. In fact, he's saying, "You are offering your son to me." So the only way that this angel can be speaking on behalf of God as God's messenger and be saying this thing is if this is not any ordinary messenger, if this is actually God himself speaking. Now, the word angel, as I've mentioned before, is a Greek word that literally means messenger. So it could apply to a human being who's a messenger. And it could apply to God being his own messenger, say the Son of God, Jesus, as a messenger for the Holy Divine Trinity, that we understand the whole of it is God, also called the Godhead. So we have this angel probably, given the way that he's using the language, the Son of God, Jesus. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, which is where we left them in the last chapter. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. Now after these things it was told to Abraham, "Behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz, his firstborn, Buz, his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine," I'm guessing that would be Nahor's concubine, "whose name was Reumah, bore Teba, Gahem, Tahash, and Maacah." So we got done with that bit of bookkeeping, a bit of family genealogy housekeeping. That will be important later, but not for a couple weeks. So the last thing, I think, to put a bow on this, I mentioned that I'm making a confession here. So based on how old Isaac may have been, 20, 30, 37 years old, Abraham had his son Ishmael, and it was 13 years before he heard from God again. Abraham had Isaac, who was 20 years, 30 years, 37 years. So we can't put a direct pin on it. It could have been 12 years. Maybe I'm safe if God didn't talk to Abraham for 12 years after Isaac was born, but I don't think that's much to brag about. So I'm just admitting that maybe I put a little bit too much emphasis on that discrepancy, that age discrepancy earlier before I came to this section and realized, it may not matter as much. So, my bad. we're done here. We can go to full screen. Usually at this point of the stream, I would be playing a computer game, just like many streamers do, trying to talk through the computer game. And I was thinking about that today. Maybe I would play a computer game. But then I was thinking, usually when I do that, the game starts to distract me. I'm not able to talk about the things I care about. And I'm not really content to just talk about what I'm doing in the game. I'm not content to sit in the world of the game. It's not meaningful to me. So I'm going to close my browser where you, even though folks can't see it, there we go. And then my music screen is red. So there we go. We'll fix the coloration there a bit. So I get distracted, as I obviously just was. And talking about the game itself is not terribly meaningful to me. So I don't think playing the game is actually a value add for the stream. And I've been talking for a while that I wanted to kind of back off from playing games. Not to say I won't ever play games in the future, but it just didn't seem like the valuable thing to do tonight. I wasn't sure how long the topic of Genesis 22 was going to last, so I decided that it would be better for me to just have a conversation with you. The purpose originally for doing the Bible segment first, I'll cover some channel history here. When I first started the channel, all I was doing was the games, talking through the games, and that was the sole source of value. And then we started to get some engagement on the channel. Some folks would come in and chat, and it was difficult for me to figure out, do I talk about what's important to me, or do I let the other person chat? How do I manage, say, the topic that I was hoping to bring? And it's hard enough to hold the topic because I'm playing the game. But it's really important to me also to hear from other people and about their beliefs and to understand where they're coming from. So eventually I decided I'm going to split the stream in two. I'm going to have the first part that's going to be, I guess for your perspective, the first part would be the Bible segment, like we just did. That's the part that I care about, that I find meaningful. And then I would be playing the game during the second part, and that would be when you might get a chance to talk about what's meaningful to you in chat. We could have more of or maybe even what's not meaningful. We could have more of a lighthearted time of discussion while I'm playing the game. So that was the original plan, and then I realized that when we're not having a discussion, it's not very meaningful for me to talk about the game. So that's where, at least in this context, if we want to chat, it makes sense to me to be able to have a back and forth conversation if that materializes. Otherwise, I get to say what I want without being distracted from the game. So I think for now, we're going to experiment with having the game set to the side. So lately, what I've been trying to do is I've been incorporating more responses to videos that I've seen on YouTube. So far, we've had two. We did a response to Jordan Peterson. He said something profound, which he tends to do, and I wanted to respond to it. So that was several streams ago. And then last week, I got to respond to my brother, who runs his own YouTube channel, Legacy Studio. That was the one that the video was hosted on. He's also got several other channels, which you can find if you go to Legacy Studio and then go to his channels tab. You'll see all his other channels listed under there. He likes, on Legacy Studio, he likes talking about tech and also playing computer games. He also, on his other channels, does things like music, comedy, caricature art. So maybe you'll find something interesting over there. He was doing a video about his goal to keep his content family friendly. And of course, I've kind of wrestled myself with how am I going to handle foul language, which I don't care for at all. I'd rather keep my content as family friendly as possible. But on the other hand, maybe some of the people that I want to interact with their ideas, maybe they would use foul language. Maybe some of the media, say certain computer games, might have foul language and might also have ideas that I'd like to engage with there. Maybe someone in chat would express themselves a way that I wouldn't. But rather than being stuck on how they express themselves, I would hopefully try to understand what it is they're saying. So I got to engage with my brother's ideas last week. So today, at this time, I am trying to put together a response to someone else's video. This will be the first video where I have any real disagreement with the person I'm responding to. My goal would be not to attack the person, not to be personal, but to deal with the ideas, engage with the ideas. This person runs it. In fact, the channel I'm hoping to respond to is called Let's Talk Religion. I think that's the actual name of the channel. I'm going, let's talk religion, let's talk about religion. I think it's like, let's talk religion. So he deals with various religion topics on his channel. And I want to look at the question he was addressing, I think probably a year or so ago, about did Jesus exist? Now, of course, that's a question that's close to my heart. And because he has a channel that covers all of these religions in scope, deals with all of these religious subjects, let me just say that I assume he knows a lot more about religion and about the study of religion than I do. I think I think on his channel he says he's looking at it from an academic point of view. So the way I interpret that, I don't know if that's how he means it, but from a position of curiosity, just trying to gather as much knowledge about everything as possible. Whereas I come from, I'll say, a biased point of view. I think Christianity is true. So I tend to focus on that concept of truth. That's why what I want to invite people to do on this channel is let's talk about truth. And I understand I'm saying things that maybe you don't believe are true. And to be honest, through my own lens, maybe it's objectively not true what I believe, how I'm expressing it. But I think it's an interesting question. How do we know what the truth is? And I think the best way to get down to that question is to look at the difference between what I believe to be true, what someone believes to be true, and try to figure out what is it that we can get down to between these two points of view to determine if either of them is true. But of course I have my limitations, my bias is my perspective. So that's another element. How do we overcome those things? You know what? I just realized I put my my microphone away. Sorry if the audio was really quiet. We'll see how it goes in hindsight on the VOD. So I just wanted this out of the way while now that I was done with the monitors. So I'm considering responding to one of his videos as a jumping off point for engaging with the ideas in that video, not intending anything personal about the creator himself. I do assume he's more educated than I am on the subjects that we'll be addressing, so I would be at a disadvantage in that respect. So I've been working on hopefully cutting down what is a lengthier video down to something that is a size that I can respond to. And there's been a lot going on in my life these days that is demanding my immediate attention. So I haven't been able to prepare that for this week. I'm not sure exactly when I'll have it ready. But that's the next project that is currently on my plate for this channel. And let's see, I'm trying to, I kind of have ideas about where I want to stop next as I'm talking, and I've got to try to remember as I think, oh, I'll go on to this topic next. Was there anything I forgot that I want to address first? I think I'll move on to what I was thinking, because in the process of trying to, oh, no, I remember what it was that caused me to hesitate. When I do the video responses, if you've seen my video responses before, you'll know that I tend to have the video in a small space up here. It doesn't take up most of the screen. And of course, I'm interrupting the video as I'm talking. so you don't get to see the whole thought of the video. Yesterday, I edited my brother's video down from 23 minutes down to around 7 or 8 minutes. And then, of course, my talking in between lengthens the time that I was spending on that video. Thankfully, I didn't have to edit Dr. Peterson's video when I responded to that. I do think I'll have to edit Let's Talk Religion's video, unfortunately. My goal when I make these edits is to keep the heart of the ideas that they're expressing, to accurately retain the final point that they're trying to get to and the best arguments for that point. Try to maintain the thought process that they use. I might misinterpret the way they think, so there's a bit of what's called hostile design in my process, because I want you to go to the link below downstairs in the description and check out the person's channel itself. So I'm open about this isn't the whole video because time constraints. Of course, the video is going to be smaller than you'd perhaps like. You won't be able to see all of the detail of it. It's going to be interrupted. You won't get the full thought of it. Even though I'm trying to convey the thoughts accurately, I may not have done that. So go to the link, go give that person a view, and then that also helps me out to be directing you to the link that's in the description so that the other person benefits, because fair use, ideally, I'm trying not to take competition from the folks to whom I am responding. So that's a point I was considering mentioning. So I've been working on editing down this individual's video. Haven't gotten far, like I said, but as I'm working on the video, of course, he's making points that kind of diminish the biblical expression of Jesus, relies more on what's called the historical Jesus, which is treated as different than the biblical Jesus, which I disagree with, but I understand the reasonings behind that, because he does make some good points in his video about the kind of information that we have available. One of the things that he said that I was wondering about, I think he said we have no contemporary sources of the life of Jesus. And I'm going, wait a minute, we've got the Gospels, and he says they were not written by the actual disciples of Jesus. He says that's universal. I don't know that I don't understand why he says it's universally agreed that they're not written by the disciples of Jesus, because I've heard of Christian apologists, people who, yeah, they're biased. They want to verify whether or not Christianity is true, may come from a point of being Christians, but also because we're Christians, because we believe God is the origin of truth, we value truth as a virtue itself. If God is not the origin of truth, because God doesn't exist, because truth is apart from God, then we want to know that. And I think in general, Christians want to follow the truth, even if it's not God, rather than a false God. That's the whole reason we're Christians. We don't want to follow false gods out there that may be more appealing to us. We want to follow the truth. So there are a lot of people who do the legwork, study to see what the truth is, and they say the apostles wrote these books. And yet this channel is saying universally, the scholars are saying that they did not. So I'm kind of scratching my head about that. I don't know enough. He probably has more information on it than I do. So I would value some input. I try to give him the benefit of the doubt as I'm thinking this through. And I'm thinking, well, I know Matthew. Well, I don't know about Matthew, really. I may have a point to add when I respond to his video, but let's say that I don't have any idea about Matthew. Mark, well, Mark wasn't a disciple or an apostle. Mark historically is understood to be the disciple of Peter. So Peter was a disciple of Jesus, and when Jesus left, the disciples became apostles. The word apostle means sent. or has some connection to the idea of being sent. They're the sent ones. So after Jesus ascended back to heaven, after he rose from the dead, his disciples were sent out, so they became apostles. And then Peter got a disciple named Mark, who is understood to be the author of the book of Mark. Unless you're one of these scholars who doubts that. I'm not sure what the majority scholarly position on that is, or what the background of the scholars who hold the various positions are. So, don't know a lot here. Luke wasn't a apostle disciple of Jesus. He came along later. He traveled around with Paul, who was not a disciple either, but he calls himself an apostle. So he wasn't under Jesus directly, but he did see Jesus in a vision, and Jesus sent him to the Gentile nations to give the gospel, the good news about how people could be right with God through Jesus, could get Jesus' righteousness to save them from punishment for their sins. Paul was sent out to the nations by God, so he calls himself an apostle. Luke was with him, was a traveling companion of his, and during the time that Luke was out there, Luke was asking questions. In the book of Luke and in the book of Acts, Luke says to this person he's writing these books for that he was, especially in Luke, he was studying to give an orderly account. It seems like Luke was interviewing eyewitnesses, possibly the apostles, possibly others who would have interacted with Jesus, maybe Jesus's family. Jesus's mother Mary, from what I understand. I'm trying to think. I think John, Jesus's disciple John, at the cross when Jesus was dying on the cross, John was there with Jesus's mother Mary, and Jesus said, "Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother." That kind of, I'm going to see if I've got the context for that correct, the wording for that correct, but the idea, and I recognize the screen's not up, let me get there first. The idea is that you're going to take care of her now, treat her like your mother, you're going to live with him now. Jesus was providing for his mother's future even while he was on the cross. So let's see, where would this have been? Which chapter? Okay. Yeah. So let me pull that up. Okay, so here we go. I'm looking at these verses. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, we kind of think that this phrase, the disciple whom he loved, is John trying not to directly reference himself. I don't know if he's trying not to brag about himself or if it's a covert brag or how this works, but the disciple whom he loved, we understand that to be John, who his name is on this particular gospel. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. And the reason that's relevant is I think there's history that John then went on to be over the church of Ephesus. I don't know if he became a pastor there or was just a elevated figure there due to his status being an apostle of Jesus. So naturally, he was taking care of Mary at Ephesus. Paul spent considerable time at Ephesus, so Luke would have had an opportunity to interview Mary. And interestingly, Luke's gospel has a lot of Mary's perspective on the birth of Jesus. So seems like it's uniquely coming from her eyewitness position. And then John, as far as I can tell, I don't know of any reason why he wouldn't be the author of the book. Now, it's possible maybe the reason it would be universal is because people are saying, well, Matthew and John didn't really write it. They would have had scribes who they might dictate the vision that God, or whatever they claim to be the vision of God. If these people are saying that the apostles were not actually divinely inspired. Whatever they made up, they dictated to one of their scribes, and the scribe wrote it down. That is how I imagine that you could say that universally it's said that they did not actually write the books. I can recognize Mark and Luke are not apostles, so those books were not written directly by apostles, but they would have had close interactions with apostles. I'm probably using up a lot of the content I'll probably rehash when I respond to the video. But as far as Matthew and John go, why wouldn't those books be written by the apostles? So I don't know what the context is that this creator's making this reference to. So I'm looking through this. I'm editing things. I'm kind of scratching my head. What does he mean by these things? He says there's no contemporary sources for the life of Jesus, and I'm going, the Gospels? I mean, John and Matthew look like they're directly written, and Mark and Luke would have been alive around the time. Now, what I understand is a contemporary source is usually alive during the life of the figure they're writing about, which these authors were alive during the life of the figure they're writing about. Now, Jesus' life was cut short by the crucifixion. Arguably, any book written today is authored contemporary with Jesus, because Jesus rose again and went to heaven, so he's still alive. But that's playing around. That's being funny. But just because a person's life is cut off, does that mean that everything written after that point is less reliable or less contemporary? If the people who wrote the sources were alive during his life, would have had the close interaction with that person, even though he died before they got to write their books, would they not be considered contemporary? So this is one of those things where maybe Let's Talk Religion would have some understanding of historical practices that I do not. I was trying to research contemporary sources. What qualifies as a contemporary source? Does it have to be... They say some of the explanations I was seeing for contemporary source, you type contemporary source into Google and it pulls up primary source as a synonym for you, which is weird because to me a primary source is like the earliest source we have for a point of history, and a contemporary source is a source that's written during the life of a person. So a primary source may not be a contemporary source if it comes along later. So that's the way I've understood primary sources and contemporary sources to work. But you go to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia says a memoir written by the actual person, the person's autobiography, may not be a primary source if it comes along later. Now, another site on Google, I don't recall exactly which source this was, so I'm afraid I can't give it the same credibility that Wikipedia gets, which even that's dubious. But another site I saw was saying the primary source could be a memoir because it was written by, say, the person who actually lived through those events, the actual subject of that history. Wikipedia was saying, well, if that person was in the act of writing of creating the historical source at that time in history, maybe it's a historical speech that someone gave, like the Gettysburg Address would be a primary historical source for the Gettysburg Address. And of course would be a secondary source of the events, let's say, of the Battle of Gettysburg, because it's talking about the battle after the fact. But had the Gettysburg Address been written, I mean, how long after the fact would it still remain a primary source is my question. Because according to one source, if Abraham Lincoln had written it at the end of his life, like the day before he got shot, then it would not have been a primary source. So I'm confused. Maybe someone can clear me up on this. Maybe someone can give me an education on historical textual criticism. But so I'm editing this video, kind of wrestling with the confusion, and I'm assuming that Let's Talk Religion knows more about this subject than I do. So I'm not saying that I'm right and they're wrong, I'm going, well, this may be a point where I just don't. I'm willing to admit ignorance. There are a lot of things that I could address. It would take some research, but that's worth it for this channel. We're talking about truth, so that's something I need to be willing to put in. So I was thinking it would take me quite a while to prepare this response that I'm about to do. And yesterday, of course, I figured, what with the things going on in my life now, it was going to be delayed anyway. It wasn't going to be ready for today anyway. But yesterday, I was listening to a podcast from a channel called Cold Case Christianity. So if you're familiar with Christian apologetics, the word apologetics is not about apologizing. It comes from a Greek word which means to give a defense, to give reasons for. So if you're familiar with giving reasons for Christianity being true, then you may be familiar with Cold Case Christianity, run by J. Warner Wallace. Link below to the content I'm talking about. I was listening to the podcast version yesterday, but this is a video version, which I think was the source of the podcast. And so J. Warner Wallace was a cold case homicide detective. So dealt with evidence, knew standards of evidence that should hold up in a court. If you're going to condemn someone for murder, this is what it takes in order to justify taking a human life legally, which should be a very high standard. And the kind of cases he works with are not your ordinary cases where you have eyewitnesses. These are like 30-year-old cases where the eyewitnesses are no longer available, which kind of begins to sound a lot like the state that we find the Gospels in. So I appreciate his perspective on the Gospels. He was a cold case homicide detective before he became a Christian. And so when he encountered the Bible and he encountered the Gospels, he recognized things that sounded familiar, sounded like qualities that he would understand from eyewitness testimony that kind of indicates the eyewitness testimony is true. So he dug in deeper. He treated the Gospels as if they were witnesses, and he's trying to figure out, are these witnesses honest? Are they dishonest? Are they neutral? Are they biased? Does that bias make them dishonest? And he came to the conclusion that the Gospels were honest eyewitness testimony, and so he became a Christian. So now, and he'll make the point, he's not a Christian because of anything that draws him to the Bible particularly. He's a Christian because he believes the Bible is true. So he's pursuing the truth first, and that led him to Christianity as he understands it. So he's one of those who holds the truth as his highest value. If Christianity were not true, he would not be a Christian. And one of the points he makes is that people claim that the writers of the Gospels are biased because, they're all Christians. Well, how did they become Christians? Are they Christians because they're biased, or are they biased because they became Christians because they decided, based on the evidence that they saw, that Christianity was true? So that's his suggestion, is that they saw Christianity was true, and that made them biased for what they believe to be the truth in the future, which does not make them dishonest. In fact, they would be dishonest if they were not biased. So some of the things I'm going through, I just thought it was great. I consider it I'll call it a natural act of God. We tend to consider God supernatural. God, I believe, works in circumstances all the time, natural circumstances. I don't necessarily know that this is a God event, but I don't see any reason why not. Why God didn't say, oh, by the way, Faith, you were working on that video. You need some information about Bible reliability, right? Here's a little information for you here. And so I got a chance to listen to the podcast, and then I looked up the YouTube channel for Cold Case Christianity, found the companion video, which is down below. I'm considering maybe juxtaposing some of the points that Let's Talk Religion makes with some of the counterpoints that J. Warner Wallace in his talk makes. they happen to talk about the same things. I don't think they were addressing one another directly. But interestingly, Let's Talk Religion mentions a source named Bart Ehrman. Ehrman, Ehrman, I think. So that's mentioned in the video. Let's Talk Religion has other sources that he mentions in the description, which I haven't read any of them, so definitely he's more educated than me there. J. Warner Wallace also talks about Bart Ehrman and responds to some of what Bart Ehrman has said. So the sources in Let's Talk Religion's description don't get addressed directly, but Bart Ehrman, who is mentioned in the video, both of them have something to say about him. So that's kind of neat for me, and I'm grateful to God for the information that has just been available since I decided to, following my decision to make this response. So hopefully I can pull that together. So I thought that would be my topic for the second segment of the stream. About ready to wrap up, but I do also want to mention I'm kind of coming to some conclusions about changes I'd like to make in this channel. So ever since I started the channel, I've started the channel with live streaming. Live streaming is beneficial because I don't edit the content before I put it out in public. I make the content as I'm putting it out in public. That keeps me from getting cold feet and saying, this isn't good enough. So like I said, last week I was responding to my brother's video, and I made the mistake of looking at the clock. Now I'm distracted. Okay. I responded to my brother's video. Had to cut down his video from 23 minutes to 7 minutes, so there was enough time for all the talking I wanted to do. And finally had it ready, put it out, and it was amazing to me how much easier it was to edit his video than it has been for me trying to chop up the live streams that I've done in the past to be content on this channel. I keep talking about editing shorter video so that you don't have to look at a video that's 2 or 3 hours long and say, do I want to put all that attention, all that time into a video, and I don't really know where she'll go with this or whether it'll be meaningful to me. So I do think that having shorter content on the channel would be valuable, but it's just been such a struggle for me to cut down my content, which is kind of rambly and random, into something that would be of value in a short period of time. There's some things I said about entertainment that I think would be valuable to have on this channel, but they take the course of several streams. So it's like 18 hours of content I've got to slog through to boil it down. And over those 18 hours, the topic of entertainment kind of shifts and changes shape. And I don't know what shape to make the final edited video once it gets done. But dealing with my brother's video, I saw how easy it was. He'd already edited his video to a certain point, and all I had to do was kind of refine it, cut out the things that were not relevant to this channel, and keep the heart of his video. So that was surprisingly easy. So that kind of emboldens me if I'm producing video that is meant to be topical. Like if I'm recording what I call a static video, something that's not live, then, and making it topical, then that would be possibly easier to edit more quickly, and I could get it out on the channel and have what I call static video. So not live, the type of videos that you see on YouTube all the time. And what I'm considering doing with that, what I'm wrestling with, of course, this is a small channel. We don't tend to get a lot of engagement in chat. We got a few bots today, but no actual engagement. So the live streams tend to run for a couple hours. So people coming later, seeing the live stream as a VOD, see 2 hours, 30 minutes, 3 hours on the timestamp and go, I'm not sure I want to dedicate 2 or 3 hours of my life to something I don't know that I care about. And then what really is the value of a live stream? It's being able to be here as I'm talking and engaging with me and having a back and forth, right? A chat. So that is attractive to me, being able to have that back and forth, being able to engage with your beliefs, getting to understand where you come from. But it's not really doing us any value at this point, since we're not getting people offering that engagement. We're not engaged in that fashion at this point. The live stream format actually causes less value because it forces videos to be longer. It forces me to be less prepared. It would be nice if the videos were kind of cut down to just the value so that I could give it to you in a nice neat package. And then the value that the live stream offers, the chat, is not really is not really there. So sometime I do want to use the live streams to engage, to have good solid discussions about the differences in our beliefs and why we believe different things and how we come down to an understanding between those things to what the truth is. I don't know that, as this channel stands, its current state, that the live stream is valuable now. So I don't think now is the time for for the value that I believe that the live stream would bring to the channel in the future. So what I'm considering someday, I'm not saying I'm cutting off the live streams now. So it may be several weeks. What I would like to do is figure out a routine for creating static videos. I want to be able to offer similar content, such as the Bible responses that I do, the series that I've been doing, the video responses. I want to be able to offer similar content in shorter form, so you'd give up less of less of your valuable time to see it, and it would be more compact, more value dense in each little video package that you're viewing, so that there's more value to you as a consumer. And then we could still have the discussion in the comments about our beliefs and about the differences between them. We could still have that give and take. I might be able to create videos as your typical YouTuber does. And as I'm creating static videos, I believe I would probably definitely pull back on the time that I spend doing live streams. I've been doing the live streams once a week, and that would be great if there were two-way engagement. But to be honest, setting up for the live stream is a little bit stressful for me. Having to be ready by a certain time, by a certain deadline, having to make sure that all the ducks are in a row. And today I forgot to update the drivers and started late. So that's not fun. I still want to do the live streams as it looks like it's going to be valuable. So maybe eventually get to a schedule of once a month. We may do them weekly as we have done, or we may back it down to none if I need the time to be able to produce the static videos. If I need time to come up with that schedule or some sort of video buffer so that I'm ready. But maybe once a month would be a nice duration to intermittently live stream with. I'm not going to make promises about what it's going to look like between now and then. I do intend to live stream weekly, at least for a couple more weeks. Got to give my life some time to get settled out, all the personal things that get in the way of video production. I need to get those out of the way, be able to develop a routine of creating static videos and having them edited in a schedule. And then after that point, I'll be backing down on how often I do the live streams, possibly 0 for a time. But I do intend to come up with video content at least weekly, whatever that looks like. So for the next couple weeks at least, we continue with the live streams. But that is a change that I am planning to come to the channel sometime in the future. I think it will wind up being valuable for everyone who would be coming to the channel. And then once we have more engagement on the channel, then the live streams would be valuable enough to be more dedicated to again. So that's it. That's the end. And I'll send you off. God bless you. And I usually say play kind. So play kind, even though we didn't have any gameplay. So I'll have to figure out some cute phrase to throw in that place when we are not doing any gameplay.